Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bob Orr. Well, we have a very busy day today. We're going to look at two of our regular series, Hot Campaign Ads of the Week with senior political producer Jill Jackson, and also, as always on Friday, Flashpoints with CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate. So we're going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. But first today, an interview with Bob Schieffer and Congressman Chris Van Hollen. The head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, who's been making campaign rounds, says despite voter discontent, he's personally confident that Democrats will hold on to the House this fall. Take a look.
All right, Congressman Chris Van Hollen, you've been out during the recess to 17 battleground districts, and you seem to be saying that the reports of the Democrats losing the House and Senate may be premature. So I guess I'd think it was news if you came back and said, oh, no, we've lost. There's no reason even to hold the election. But what makes you confident about this?
Well, Bob, we know that our Republican colleagues here on Capitol Hill are prematurely popping the champagne bottles. But I can tell you, from talking to our candidates around the country and talking to people on the ground, there's a big disconnect between what's happening in these districts and many of the political pundits in the Washington area. And the fact of the matter is, as we get closer and closer to Election Day, people are focusing more and more on the choice between the candidates in each of these districts. And in fact, what happened in Delaware the other day with Michael Castle's loss sent a very clear signal that there's no room for moderates, there's no room for pragmatists in the Republican Party. And I think that kind of thing is happening around the country. And so as people really focus in on that decision, who's going to be casting the votes in Congress over the next 2 years, they don't want to go back to the economic policies that got us into this mess, and they don't want to go back to those policies on steroids. I mean, some of these guys are way off on the right, and people are going to be very uneasy, I think, about going in the direction some of these Tea Party candidates and some of these very, very right-wing candidates want to take the country.
You know, I think you make a very arguable point at the least. But I also know this. I looked at the CBS News poll that came out yesterday, and it says that 55% of the people want to replace their congressman. And you, congressmen, know as well as I do, all of us who've watched these things over the years, people are always saying, oh, we ought to, kick the bums out, those congressmen there, they don't amount to anything. But they say, on the other hand, I like my guy, or I like the woman that represents me. This seems something very different than what we've seen before. And people saying, 55% of the people, more than half, saying, I want to get rid of my congressman. What's your take on that?
Well, but I think what's driving a lot of this is the state of the economy. Look, we've made significant improvements in the economy from where we were 20 months ago, but we're not where we want to be yet. And agreed. I mean, the Democrats agreed, incumbents agree that we need to continue to move forward. And so the question for voters is going to be, what's the best way to move forward? And as we listen to what the Republican leadership says it would do if given the opportunity, and what these Republican candidates are saying they would do, people are learning that, number one, it's no different than the same economic policies that got us into this mess. And now in some cases, as with some of these Tea Party candidates, they're saying that there's absolutely no role for the government in protecting consumers, reining in Wall Street. I mean, the Wall Street reform bill, for example, was a major effort to make sure that never again is the taxpayer left having to pay the bill for bad decisions on Wall Street. That was the whole idea, more transparency, more accountability. These guys are saying, hey, let's go back to the days when there's no oversight, no transparency, anything goes. And I don't think people really want to go back to that particular agenda because it didn't serve our country very well.
You know, the thing in our CBS poll that showed that people dislike most of all, and they're very upset about jobs, but what they really dislike is partisan infighting, partisan politics. Do you see any sign that the partisanship is going to let up? I mean, we're in election season now, and I think it'd be very difficult to imagine that we're going to see a lessening of partisan politics on either side. But do you see anything, at least sort of over the hill, where we might somehow get past some of this partisanship that we seem to be just mired in right now?
Well, Bob, we'll have to wait and see. But if I could just use the most recent bill we have in the Congress, the small business lending bill, as an example. This is a bill that finally passed the Senate and finally overcame a Republican filibuster because Senator Voinovich, a Republican from Ohio who's retiring, said, I'm not going to play the politics anymore. I'm not going to vote no just because it's a good message to send. I'm going to vote yes because this bill is good for small businesses. And I know it's one of those traps where you sound like you're being partisan by saying that we should get to a more bipartisan approach. But the fact of the matter is that small business bill should be a bipartisan bill. And when Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, says to his troops, listen, we're going to vote against all this stuff because we think somehow it's a good message for us to be saying no, and let's send the message that the Democrats are responsible for this tough economy without putting any of their ideas to the test. I agree with you. I think people don't like that, and I think they need to know more about what is motivating some of those decisions, especially in the Senate, where Mitch McConnell has made no secret of the fact that he's playing what I think is a very cynical political game. And so hopefully after this election season, Republicans will come forward and help participate in moving this country forward rather than just standing on the sidelines and casting blame.
Do you think President Obama will be an asset or a liability for Democrats in the fall? Because, I look at these latest polls, his approval rating is now less than 50%. People don't like his dealings with the economy. They think the country's moving in the wrong direction. What do you think happened to President Obama's popularity?
Well, I think expectations were very high, Bob. They were very high that we'd be able to very quickly turn around the economy. And the fact of the matter is, when you're in as deep a hole as we were in, it does take time. I mean, 20 months is not a whole lot of time to get you out of free fall. We have stabilized the economy. We now see positive private sector job growth, not where we want it, but we are seeing it. But I think what you're seeing with the president's numbers is the fact that expectations were very high, a sense that we would have a V-shaped recovery, and it's going to take a little longer. But again, at the end of the day, when voters go into that booth, they got that choice to make. They got a choice between two candidates, and I think the president's got a pretty good argument that he helped, with the help of the Congress, in supporting small businesses around the country to help stabilize a very tough situation, and he is asking the right question. Do you really want to go back to economic policies that got us into this mess to begin with, or even worse? And that is the most important role for the president right now, to be framing that choice very clearly, to be demonstrating the contrast between the candidates, because what your poll and other polls have shown is that the fact of the matter is, while neither party is particularly popular, and I understand that, people have a lot less confidence in Republicans, and for good reason, because they know what the consequence of those policies were for 8 years. They know the end of that movie, and so they really don't want to go back.
Let me ask you just this part, though. The part of the problem that the president is having, this whole business of people questioning whether he's a United States citizen, whether he was born in this country. This whole idea that 25% of people think he's a Muslim. Maybe it's not that high, but it's a very high percentage of people who believe that. Where does that come from?
Well, this is a very, I think, cynical effort to try and delegitimize the president. We see that happening in various places around the country. Newt Gingrich, who the other day made some comment to suggest that, the president was some alien thinker, and he had the sort of the Kenyan anti-colonialist approach to the world. Look, these are efforts to try and say, the president is not one of us. It's a very cynical, sort of gross political strategy. And I really do believe that the great majority of the American people are going to say, that's not right. We don't want to go there. And unfortunately, that's the kind of politics we've been seeing, and I think people will reject that. At the end of the day, I really believe, Bob, our country will reject that kind of politics. They'll see it for what it is. They understand that we need to come together as a country to finally pull ourselves out of this economic challenge, and that it doesn't make sense to have people making such calculated efforts to undermine the President of the United States in the sense of trying to make him appear like some alien being.
All right. Chris Van Hollen, who's been out on the campaign trail and reports back with what he believes is good news for the Democrats. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, and our thanks to Bob Schieffer for that. Well, now let's bring in Jill Jackson with her hot political ads. Jill, what has caught your attention this week?
Well, we have 3 ads for you this week. They run from serious to spoofy. Our first ad comes from Senator Barbara Boxer from California, who's in a very tough race against former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina. So let's take a look at that one.
Fiorina laid off 30,000 workers.
When you're talking about massive layoffs, which we did, perhaps the work needs to be done somewhere else.
Fiorina shipped jobs to China. And while Californians lost their jobs, Fiorina tripled her salary, bought $1 million yacht, and 5 corporate jets.
I'm proud of what I did at HP.
Carly Fiorina, outsourcing jobs out for herself.
I'm Barbara Boxer, and I approve this message.
Wow, gloves are off there. That's pretty tough.
It is, in fact, Carly Fiorina. Some of her friends at Hewlett-Packard set up a website. It's carly@hp.com, where former coworkers could write in about her record there to defend her. But at the same time, this is a theme we're seeing in races across the country. Everyone's pitting the business person against the politician and arguing over who is best to fix the economic problems.
Normally you see the challenger attacking the incumbent. This is really interesting.
Yes.
You have an incumbent here, not necessarily defending her record, but going after
exactly.
the opponent.
She's on offense, but she's doing that because she's on defense and knows she's in trouble and is absolutely going right after Carly Fiorina's record.
What else we got?
Well, did you know that Speaker Nancy Pelosi has a challenger in San Francisco?
I would say, does it matter?
It's a Republican challenger in liberal San Francisco. Well, she does. His name is John Dennis. He's a businessman, and he actually put together this ad. He had this idea with a radio producer friend of his to do movie-themed ads. So here is his ad against Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
I wish there was a political party I could vote for with a brain. Or courage. Or a heart.
I don't care about political parties. I just want a home that isn't blown away by debt. Oh, Toto.
I'll put you in debt for generations.
Oh, that's not it at all, Toto. Not at all.
Hello, my pretty. I will save you from those evil Republicans. But first, pay $18,000 a month for my downtown office, and then go into massive debt for Wall Street bailouts. And here are my monkeys to make you pay for it all.
Step back, everyone.
Oh, I melty.
Thank you for saving us. Who are you?
I'm John Dennis. I'm running for Congress. I believe in following the Constitution, and I believe in reducing debt, and I believe it's time to throw a little water on politicians who say one thing and do another, like Nancy Pelosi.
We're home, Toto. We're home.
Is that going to be on the air, really?
Yes, it's going to be on the air, and we asked Speaker Pelosi if she'd seen the ad. She said she has seen a split second of it. She was asked what she thought about it, and she said, if you want to spend that money in my district, go for it. Spend all you can. Spend it all.
The old American Bandstand used to rate songs for Can You Dance to It? I at least rate that for creativity.
Very creative. In fact, I was told, the candidate himself told me the next ad is going to be James Bond themed. So
make sure I'm back for that. Would you?
Right.
All right, and that brings us to number 3.
The third is from the senior senator from the state of Iowa, Senator Chuck Grassley. Let's take a look.
I heard Chuck Grassley has a Twitter. Oh, can it be cured?
Oh, not that kind. I like to use new technologies like Twitter and Facebook just to keep in touch. And meetings in 99 counties every year. I'll tweet, I'll text, I'll do whatever it takes. I work for you.
Grassley works for us.
I'm Chuck Grassley, and I approve this message.
That's interesting.
It is.
The message there is, I've been around for a while, but I'm with the times.
Been around for a while. He's 77 years old today, and
Today. Happy birthday to Senator Grassley.
Yep, and what I think is actually interesting about this ad is think back to just 2008. Twitter, nobody talked about Twitter back then, and now we have one of the most senior members of the Senate putting it in a television campaign ad.
Have you seen tweets from Senator Grassley?
Absolutely, he's a regular tweeter.
Really? Wow, that's quite interesting.
In fact, he tweeted, I know it's his birthday because he tweeted it this morning.
Okay, well, technology is a wonderful thing.
It is.
Jill, thanks very much. That was quite entertaining. That brings us now to our third segment today, Flashpoints, our series on foreign policy challenges, most of them serious around the world. Juan Zarate is here, and we're starting with two of the perennial hotspots. Juan, this could be on everybody's list every week. North Korea and Iran. What's up?
What's interesting here, Bob, is that we had a summer of sanctions with respect to both Iran and North Korea that are biting. With respect to North Korea, you had the Treasury Department and the State Department enhancing the existing sanctions that exist. Interestingly, naming as part of the blacklist Office 39 from the North Korean regime. This is the office, the department of their bureaucracy that actually engages in illicit financial activity. And so, quite significant that they went out and named this office, and the screws are tightening. With respect to Iran, these sanctions are really biting. And you had former President Rafsanjani from Iran saying just this week that they are facing sanctions like they've never seen before. You've seen the private sector pulling out. You've seen countries like Japan and South Korea, which had heretofore not wanted to impose sanctions, doing so. And you've seen the legislation and the efforts from the U.S. government really starting to bite, especially with petroleum exports. And
so financial pressures really can work.
It can absolutely work. The million-dollar question with both North Korea and Iran, though, Bob, is always, do they work to change the regime's calculus, ultimately, on the things that we care about? And in both cases, it's the nuclear question. And that is the big policy debate. Though these sanctions may be working as designed, they may be biting very hard. Are they going to ultimately slow the nuclear clock for both countries? And are they going to change those regimes' minds or bring them to the table to a point of compromise? The jury's still out on that, and I'm not too confident, especially with respect to both of these countries and their track record.
Yeah, no, well, they've had a very spotty track record, and sometimes we get their attention for a short period of time and then gone again.
That's right. We saw that with North Korea in 2005. We hit them very hard with financial sanctions. They had their nuclear test in 2006. They were brought back into the six-party talks. It dissolved again. And so it's a matter of gauging the pressure and trying to figure out how to use leverage well. It's hard.
A lot of military hardware could be going to Saudi Arabia. Big arms deal.
A record deal, actually. $60 billion deal over 5 to 10 years from the United States. Significant in its size, obviously. You have F-15s going to Saudi Arabia, helicopters, Apaches, Blackhawks, Little Birds. This is good news for Boeing, by the way, which makes a lot of these products, and in terms of jobs for Americans. But importantly, what it does is it sends a huge diplomatic signal. First, to the Saudis. It underscores the importance of the relationship. Secondly, to our other Sunni Arab allies in the region, the UAE, Egypt, Morocco, to say we're with you in defense against threats to you, primarily Iran. And finally, it's a message to Iran. We are going to be in the region, we are going to help our friends, and we're going to supply them in a way that will give them advantages over you if, in fact, there is a conflict to come. And I think that's the most important issue here, because it's a signal in the context of the growing conflict with Iran, either potentially for a war, frankly, or setting up containment of Iran if, in fact, they achieve nuclear capabilities. And so this deal is not just a regular arms deal. It fits into this broader geopolitical question as to how to deal with Iran. The other thing I would say, Bob, is, and it's interesting, is you didn't hear much of an objection from the Israelis. And what this underscores is two things. One, the Israelis are in line to get some goodies on their own. They're in line for new F-35s. They're also acquiring some new anti-ballistic missile systems. They also, frankly, have the same interests as Saudi Arabia. They don't like Iran. Both
it's
countries.
The common enemy.
It's the common enemy, exactly. And so the enemy is my friend, in a sense. They don't say it publicly. It's not talked about too much openly, but that's the reality, and that's why you didn't see too much squawking from Israeli politicians on this.
All right, the Turkey constitutional referendum. Where does that stand? What's going on there?
Well, what's interesting was Turkey just had this constitutional referendum, 26 amendments to their constitution from the early 1980s. This was important. It was a question of whether or not the referendum would go through, the amendments would go through. They did, resoundingly. They were all accepted. But the bigger question was this a referendum on the direction of Turkey? Was this a referendum on the current Prime Minister, Erdogan, who has proven very popular but somewhat controversial? Is this a referendum on his party, the AKP party? And underlying all this, Bob, is a question of what really is at play here. Because the referendum was styled as a move toward greater democracy, greater transparency, greater control of the military by civilian authorities, greater control of the judiciary. But those who don't like AKP or Erdogan say that really behind all of this is an Islamist agenda, that if you look at his history, what he's really trying to do is gain greater control for his party and actually draw it back from the secular roots of the founding of modern Turkey by Ataturk. And so it's interesting because you've got a question of, is this a deficit of secularism, or is this promotion of democracy? And is there something else at play underneath? And this has been ongoing as part of the national debate in Turkey for a couple of years now. And I think this referendum was part of that ongoing debate.
We talk about terrorism an awful lot, and oftentimes it's not good news there, but sometimes there is good news. And you have an example today.
A good example, ETA, the Basque terrorist group, designated terrorist group not only by Spain and France, but also by the European Union and the United States, has called for a ceasefire. Now, this is not new. ETA has called for ceasefires in the past. In fact, the current Prime Minister, Zapatero, has been burned by potential negotiations with ETA. ETA, of course, bombed the Madrid airport in 2006 during some of these negotiations. So people are a little bit wary. But what's interesting about this moment for the call for the ceasefire is three things. First, ETA's under extreme pressure from not only Spanish authorities, but also French authorities. And so their leadership's been decimated. Two, they're losing more and more grassroots support within the Basque region. And so the political parties that have normally supported ETA are calling for an all-out disarmament and demilitarization of the movement. And third, to me, what's really interesting is that this falls into a larger debate about what happens to terrorist groups in the long term. We saw, for example, in Sri Lanka, the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, militarily defeated. You've seen IRA sort of negotiate its way out of being a terrorist group. There's still some violent elements there, but that's gone. ETA could go several different ways, but it's interesting to see this as part of the broader debate about what can be done about terrorist groups in the long term.
What's the end game? How do they unwind?
How do they unwind?
Because terror movements tend to build, and they also have to then unwind.
And they deflate, and they can get integrated, they can get destroyed, they can morph into something else, and I think that's a big debate, not only for ETA, but as we look at Al-Qaeda and what happens with the Sunni extremist movements in the future, I think this will be interesting to watch.
Well, it's good to leave it on a good note, and always interesting. Juan, thanks again.
Thank you, Bob.
All right. And finally, if you happen to be around the Washington area this weekend, be on the lookout for a few hundred motorcycles. The Special Operations Warriors Foundation is raising money for college educations for the kids of wounded soldiers. Kaylee Hartung has more on that.
Since 1980, the Special Operations Warrior Foundation has provided college scholarships and educational counseling to the surviving children of Special Operations personnel killed in training accidents or operational missions. Their 7th annual motorcycle run is coming up, and to tell us about the event and how the foundation is helping our soldiers and their families, we have retired Army Special Forces officers Neil Zimmerman and Chris Perkins joining us here today. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here.
So, Chris, tell me about this foundation, how you two became involved and why.
Well, the foundation, as you suggested, was started in 1980, was the spin-off, if you will, the aftermath of the Iranian hostage rescue attempt in Iran. We lost 9 soldiers. They left behind 17 children. Someone had to take care of the educational benefits, if you will, of those children, so we created what's called the Bull Simmons Foundation. That has since, I think it was 1995, it morphed into the Special Operations Warrior Foundation and included a broader segment of the Special Ops community. We have the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets, Army Rangers, aviators, civil affairs. I think you know our community. Unfortunately, the numbers speak for themselves. We've lost about 750 special operators over the last 30 years. Of those 750, more than 60% were in the last 10 years. So you can see that there's a greater need. Those fallen warriors left about, I want to say, 850 children behind. We've put about 160 through college already. We have about the same today in college, and that leaves about 500 in the pipeline. Those children range from infants all the way to high school students, and it's a wonderful foundation. I mean,
One of the differences, if I may, about the foundation as a charity is it's a 4-star rated charity. 98% of the proceeds that are brought in go right back to the students. And the big difference in this one as well is, as a motto to our fallen brothers, we take care of their kids. That said, we take care of the kids from the time of his death or her death. So we make connections when they're very young to make sure that they're not left alone, and when they get to the age of deciding what college, what to study, and so forth, we're there to help them, whether it be a 4-year university or a technical school. So they have the latitude to do what they want to do and make a difference.
Now, you're both retired special ops officers. This must be very personal for you to take care of the fallen
absolutely.
children.
We both have our own children that we've raised, and we've seen them or are watching them go through college, and we've both been in the D.C. area for some time. I was in the Pentagon in 9/11, and Chris very close by as well. When we're not 6,000 miles away fighting the battles, we're fighting the battles inside D.C. So it's a personal payback for us to take care of those guys that have fallen, yes.
Now tell me about this motorcycle run.
Oh,
Sounds
awesome.
like quite
It's a
an
lot of
adventure
fun.
you guys are up for on Saturday.
It was inspired, 8 years ago I was locked up in this facility up in Pennsylvania for a couple of months underground, and I said, well, you know what, a lot of things are going on in the world, and how can I make a difference from this hole? And so I came up with this idea to do a motorcycle ride through 4 states and 3 national battlefields in 19 counties in less than 3 hours. And so I talked to a couple of soft buddies, and I said, well, I think we can pull this off. So it actually starts in Leesburg, Virginia, 11 o'clock on Saturday the 18th, this coming Saturday. Beautiful weather. We'd like everybody to come out and join us. And we traverse through the mountains, and we end up doing a slow roll through Gettysburg National Park, end up at Battlefield Harley-Davidson for a big Italian meal and a lot of gifts to give away and a lot of camaraderie.
And you'll both be on bikes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And is this a route you've both traveled before?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So highlight of the trip. What are you looking forward to the most?
Oh, there's a little bit of everything on this ride. There's some very quaint small towns. Every year it's a little bit different in that they all have their own things going on. We go through some small places where local law enforcement is overwhelmed when just to see us coming. Others open us with, greet us with open arms. But the battlefields themselves really ring true to our kind. From Leesburg to Antietam, and then the slow roll through Gettysburg really brings a somber moment for us. And an opportunity to reflect.
And how many bikers will be involved on Saturday?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Pre-registration, we encourage pre-registration on the website, www.battlefieldrun.com. We have 26 bikes pre-registered. Now, a lot of our kind and others don't pre-register and won't put their information out there. We encourage you to show up anyway, and we're expecting over 200 motorcycles for this run.
That's great. Well, wishing you guys great weather. Thank you so much for joining us.
Looking forward to it, and perhaps you can join us on Saturday.
Anytime.
If I can ride on the back, I have no skills to drive the bike, but
I'll find you a bike.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Kaylee Hartung, thanks for that. And that is Washington Unplugged for today. Thanks for joining us. We are here every weekday on CBSNews.com. I'm Bob Orr. Have a great weekend.
If we don't expand our imagination,
Justification for being what you are.